Some things you don't notice right away, and when you finally do, it's already too late. When I met Grace, she was unlike anyone I'd ever known. Fierce, determined, unshakable. She had this magnetic energy about her, the kind that pulled people in and made them believe she was destined for something great. And she was. She hadn't come from wealth or privilege, but that never stopped her. If anything, it fueled her hunger for success. She set ambitious goals for herself and worked relentlessly to achieve them. From the moment we got married, I knew she wouldn't be content with a simple life. She landed a position at a prestigious company almost immediately, and it was clear that she was in her element. The higher-ups took notice of her drive, her intelligence, her ability to command a room without raising her voice. It wasn't long before she rose through the ranks, and 6 years later, she was leading an entire department. I was proud of her. I admired her. But at some point, without me realizing it, things began to shift. I couldn't pinpoint exactly when it started. It wasn't some dramatic moment, no sudden coldness or obvious fights. Instead, it was subtle. Slow. Grace had always been someone who loved sharing her day with me. She'd come home, kick off her heels, pour herself a glass of wine, and unwind by venting about her colleagues. Some new hire who kept messing up, a ridiculous deadline, an office scandal. She always had stories, and I loved listening to them. But then one day, she stopped. She still talked about work, but her words became vague, her stories shorter. When I asked about specific projects or colleagues, she'd smile and say, "Oh, nothing interesting happened today." But I knew that wasn't true. Grace's work had always been interesting to her. And then there was the night of the business, dinner. The unsettling return, she had mentioned it casually that morning. "We have a late meeting today followed by dinner. It's standard networking stuff." I didn't think twice about it. These kinds of events were common in her field, but when she came home that night, something was off. She walked through the door, took off her coat, and let out a breath like she had been holding it in for hours. Her posture was tense, her movements sharper than usual. "Hey," I greeted her from the couch. "How was the dinner?" "Fine," she said quickly, heading straight for the kitchen. Not exhausting, not boring, not pointless, just fine. Something about the way she said it made me sit up. I followed her, watching as she opened the fridge and stared inside like she'd forgotten what she was looking for. Her fingers tapped against the door absent-mindedly. "Are you okay?" I asked. "I'm just tired," she muttered, grabbing a bottle of water. "It was a long day." "Did something happen?" She hesitated, just for a second, but it was enough. Then she forced a smile, one of those small, polite smiles people give when they want to end a conversation. "No, it was just a typical corporate dinner. You know how it is." Except I didn't. And she knew that. Grace had never been the kind of person to brush things off. If she was frustrated, she vented. If she was upset, she let it out. But tonight, she was holding something back. I didn't push her. Not then. But something inside me told me that this wasn't just exhaustion. The unease from that night never really went away. If anything, it only grew. Grace became more distant, not in an obvious, cruel way, but in a quiet, slow withdrawal, the kind you don't notice at first because you convince yourself it's nothing. She was still kind, still smiled when I kissed her goodnight, but her mind was somewhere else. I started noticing little things. She spent longer picking out her outfits, sometimes trying on 2 or 3 different combinations before deciding. I would walk into the room and catch her staring at herself in the mirror, adjusting her blouse, fixing her hair, looking uncertain. Grace had always been confident. She never second-guessed herself, but now she did. Then came the nights when I would wake up and find her sitting at the edge of the bed, her head in her hands. The first time it happened, I thought she was just having trouble sleeping. "Grace?" I murmured, my voice thick with sleep. She didn't answer right away. "What's wrong?" I asked again, sitting up. She let out a small breath. "Nothing. I'm just tired." A simple answer. Dismissive. But the way she sat there, unmoving, staring at the floor, it didn't feel like nothing. I wanted to believe her. I wanted to roll over, close my eyes, and pretend that she wasn't slipping away from me. But something had changed. I could feel it. I just didn't know what it was yet. Sometimes people don't give themselves away with words, but with silence. I didn't want to be the kind of husband who overanalyzed every little thing. I wasn't jealous by nature, and I never believed in smothering a person with suspicions. Grace and I had built our marriage on trust, or so I had thought. But trust is a fragile thing, and once it cracks, no matter how much you try to ignore it, you start seeing everything differently. The night of that business dinner never really left my mind. Something had happened. I didn't know what, but it had unsettled her enough to strip away that sharp confidence she always carried. And after that night, the distance between us only grew wider. She stopped making excuses for why she came home late. She didn't bother giving explanations anymore, as if she had simply decided that I didn't need to know. And maybe she was right. Maybe I didn't need to know. But that didn't mean I wasn't noticing. The first time I saw it, I almost brushed it off. It was a Sunday morning, and Grace had just stepped out of the shower, a towel wrapped around her body, her damp hair curling slightly at the ends. She was getting dressed when I walked into the room, still groggy from sleep, rubbing my face as I leaned against the doorway. "Morning," I murmured. "Morning," she replied, not looking at me as she reached for a blouse hanging on the back of the chair. And that's when I saw it. A bruise, just beneath her collarbone, small but noticeable, faint purple against her otherwise flawless skin. "What happened?" I asked, nodding toward it. She glanced at me, then at the mirror as if she had forgotten it was even there. Her fingers instinctively brushed over the mark, and I saw something flicker across her face, something like hesitation. Then, too quickly, she forced a laugh. "Oh, that?" I bumped into the edge of my desk at work. It was an answer that made sense, an easy explanation, but I didn't believe her. Grace had always been careful. Grace never bumped into things, and the way she avoided my eyes as she said, "It?" That was what really got to me. I didn't press her. I just nodded slowly, pretending to accept it, but inside, something twisted. That was the moment when my doubt stopped being just a shadow in the back of my mind. It became real. A few days later, I was at a cafe near my office grabbing a coffee during a short break when I heard a familiar voice behind me. "Andrew?" I turned to see Olivia, one of Grace's co-workers. We had met a few times at company events, casual conversations, polite small talk. She was friendly, approachable, someone Grace had always seemed to trust. "Hey," I greeted, surprised to see her. Small world. She hesitated for a moment before stepping closer. There was something off about the way she looked at me, like she wanted to say something but wasn't sure if she should. "Do you have a minute?" she asked carefully. I frowned. "Yeah. What's up?" She glanced around, as if making sure no one was listening, then motioned toward an empty table in the corner. I sat down across from her, a knot forming in my stomach. "I wasn't sure if I should say anything," she started, stirring her coffee absent-mindedly. "But I think you should." "No." The knot tightened. "No what?" She took a breath. "It's about Grace." I forced myself to stay still, to keep my face neutral, even as my pulse picked up. "Go on," I said. She hesitated again, then finally leaned in, lowering her voice. "She's been different lately. At work, more anxious, more distracted. She jumps when her phone rings, and there's this guy, Daniel." I didn't move. I didn't even blink. But inside, something went cold. "Daniel?" I repeated. Olivia nodded. "They've been working together for a while. At first, it just seemed like a normal professional relationship. But lately," she trailed off. I leaned forward. "Lately what?" she exhaled. "Lately, it seems like something more. He's always around her. They have these hushed conversations in the hallways. And last week, I asked her if everything was okay, and she—" Olivia hesitated. She started crying. I felt my hands clench into fists beneath the table. "Did she say anything?" I asked, my voice tight. Just one thing, Olivia said softly. She said, I feel trapped. The words echoed in my head for the rest of the day. I feel trapped. I didn't know what it meant. But I knew one thing for certain. Grace was lying to me. And if she was lying, that meant there was something to hide. I didn't confront her right away. I wasn't the type to throw accusations blindly. If something was going on, I needed to see it for myself. So I watched, and the more I watched, the more I saw the cracks, the way she avoided my touch, the way she checked the time more often than before. The way her eyes darted away from mine when I asked simple questions. I told myself I would wait, that I wouldn't jump to conclusions. But the next time her phone rang, and she walked into the other room to answer it, I didn't look away. Listened. I heard the hushed whisper, and I knew. I didn't have all the answers yet, but I was going to get them. Once you see the truth, the only thing left is deciding what to do with it. Ever since my conversation with Olivia, I had been living in a strange in-between, caught between what I knew deep down and the part of me that still wanted to deny it, but denial only lasts as long as you can fool yourself. And I couldn't fool myself anymore. I started seeing everything through a different lens. The way Grace flinched when her phone vibrated. The way she seemed to shrink into herself when I casually asked about her day. The way she avoided my touch, not just physically, but emotionally. It was like she was already halfway out the door. And maybe, in some ways, she was. The final confirmation. That night, I watched her from across the dinner table. She was pushing her food around with her fork, barely eating. Her eyes were unfocused, lost in thought. You barely touched your food, I said. She glanced up, startled, as if she had forgotten I was there. I'm just not that hungry. I studied her, my stomach tightening. Rough day? She nodded, giving me a weak smile. Yeah, you know how it is. But that was the thing. I didn't. Because she didn't tell me anymore. The silence stretched between us, thick and suffocating. I decided to try one last time. Grace, is there something you want to tell me? I didn't say it accusingly. I didn't raise my voice. I just asked. She froze for a split second, so quick that if I hadn't been watching closely, I might have missed it. Then she forced a laugh. What do you mean? I exhaled slowly, setting my fork down. I mean that something is wrong. I see it. I feel it, and I think you know exactly what I'm talking about. Her fingers tightened around her glass of water. You're imagining things. Am I? I leaned forward slightly. You've been different for weeks. Distant, jumpy. You barely talk to me anymore. And then there's Daniel. I said his name deliberately. Watched the way her lips parted slightly, her breath hitching for just a moment. She recovered quickly, shaking her head. He's just a co-worker. Then why did you tell Olivia you feel trapped? And just like that, I saw the mask slip. Her face went pale. Her grip on the glass trembled. And for the first time in weeks, she wasn't able to force a smile or play it. Off! Olivia talked to you? She whispered. She was worried about you, I said evenly. And so am I, so tell me the truth, Grace. Her mouth opened, then closed. She looked down, away from me, her chest rising and falling faster now. I saw the exact moment she realized there was no more running, and then, finally, she broke. She let out a shaky breath, pressing her hands against her face. I didn't mean for any of this to happen, she said, her voice raw. I swear to God, Andrew, I never meant for this to happen. I didn't speak. I just waited. She exhaled again and let her hands drop to her lap. When she looked at me, I saw something I hadn't seen in a long time. Fear. It started small, she admitted. Conversations at work. Nothing inappropriate. Nothing serious. Just someone to talk to. Someone who understood me. The words stung more than they should have. I thought I understood you. She flinched. You do. But it's different. I didn't realize how much pressure I was under until I met him. And he made me feel like I wasn't alone. And then? I asked coldly. She hesitated, and then I crossed a line. A sharp pain twisted in my chest, but I forced myself to stay still. How far? Tears filled her eyes. But I didn't care. I wanted the truth, no matter how much it hurt. It wasn't just once, she admitted. I don't even know how it happened, it just did. I clenched my jaw so hard it ached. You do know how it happened, Grace? You made a choice, again and again. She wiped at her face, her hands trembling. It's not just that, Andrew, it's worse than you think. For the first time, her voice held something new, something darker. He won't leave me alone. I felt my stomach drop. What? Daniel. She swallowed hard. He won't let me go. I told him it was a mistake. I told him it was over. But he keeps calling, keeps showing up at my office. He threatened to tell you everything if I don't. She cut herself off, shaking her head violently. I was scared. I am scared. For a long moment, I didn't say anything. I just stared at the woman I had loved for years. The woman who had once been my entire world. And now, she was nothing more than a stranger. So let me get this straight, I finally said, my voice eerily calm. You didn't just betray me. You let yourself get trapped by a man who is now blackmailing you? She looked away, ashamed. I didn't think it would go this far. But it did. I stood up slowly, running a hand down my face. I felt sick, angry, but above all else, I felt done. I understand if you hate me, she whispered. I laughed. An empty, bitter sound. Hate you? No, Grace. Hate would mean I still care enough to feel something, and right now, all I feel is relief that I finally see you for who you really are. Tears streamed down her face, but I didn't care. No, I lost you, she choked out. But I'm scared, Andrew. He's not going to stop. I took a deep breath, letting my own emotions settle. Then let's make sure he does. Because no matter what she had done, no matter how much he had hurt me, I wasn't going to let some bastard ruin my life any more than he already had. Daniel thought he had power over her. That was about to change. Despite it all, I couldn't ignore the fear in her voice. Daniel had turned from a temptation into a threat. He wasn't just a man she had an affair with. He was a predator. Someone who knew exactly how to manipulate, how to push someone into a corner and make them feel like they had no way out. Grace had put herself in this situation, but I wasn't. The kind of man who could walk away while someone was in danger, even if that someone had shattered my trust. Even if I knew that after this was over, there was no saving us. So I made my choice, not for her, not for us, but because I refused to let a man like Daniel win. It didn't take long to find him. Men like Daniel never really hid. They thrived on being seen, on being known, on the power they held over others. And from what I had gathered, he liked to drink at a particular upscale bar near their office, one of those places where men in tailored suits pretended they weren't miserable. I walked in and spotted him immediately. He was sitting at the bar, a drink in his hand, leaning too close to some woman who looked vaguely uncomfortable with his attention. It told me everything I needed to know. I crossed the room, taking my time, letting him see me coming. His eyes flicked up, and at first he didn't react. Then his smirk faltered, just slightly. Good. I pulled out the stool next to him and sat down. You and I need to talk. Daniel exhaled through his nose, tilting his drink in his hand. About what? I didn't look away. You know exactly what. For a moment he seemed to consider playing dumb, but then he leaned back slightly, taking a sip of his whiskey. So she told you. She did. And? He turned toward me fully now, smirking like this was some kind of joke. What? You came here. To threaten me? Punch me in the face? Let me save you the trouble, buddy. She came to me, not the other way around. His words barely registered. They were meant to provoke, to get under my skin. But I didn't flinch. I wasn't here for theatrics. I was here to end this. Grace made her choices. I said evenly. And she'll have to live with them. But you crossed a different line. He rolled his eyes. Spare me the speech. She liked the attention, and now she regrets it. That's not my problem. No, I agreed. But making sure you never go near her again? That is my problem. He laughed, shaking his head. And what exactly are you going to do about it? I leaned in, lowering my voice just enough to make him pay attention. You think you're untouchable. That's your biggest mistake. His smirk wavered. You're not as smart as you think you are, Daniel. The things you sent her, the threats, they leave a trail. And I made sure someone else has that trail now. If you ever so much as text her again, I won't have to do anything, because you'll already be done. His jaw tightened slightly, but I wasn't finished. Men like you are all the same. You use fear to control people. But the second that fear disappears, so does your power. And right now, you have nothing. For the first time, he looked unsettled. He tried to cover it with a scoff, but I saw the flicker of doubt in his eyes. She's not worth all this effort, he muttered. You're right, I said coldly. She's not. I stood up, pulling a few bills from my pocket and tossing them on the bar. Enjoy your drink, Daniel. It's the last time you'll ever feel like you have the upper hand. And then I walked away, never looking back. The next day, Daniel resigned from his position without explanation. A week later, I heard he had left town entirely. And just like that, he was gone. Grace was safe, but we were over. She tried, of course. She begged. She cried. She swore that she had made the biggest mistake of her life. I was lost, Andrew, she sobbed one night. I didn't realize what I was doing until it was too late. You realized, I said simply. You just didn't care until you had something to lose. She tried to take my hand, but I pulled away. I love you, she whispered. I didn't respond. Because love doesn't survive betrayal. Love doesn't survive manipulation. And love sure as hell doesn't survive the moment you realize that. The person you trusted the most was the one who destroyed you. So I walked away, and this time, I didn't look back. Life had a strange way of moving on. I built something new for myself, found clarity in the quiet, learned what it meant to stand on my own again. And then one evening, as I was walking through the city, I saw her, Grace. She was sitting alone at a coffee shop, staring blankly at a cup of untouched tea. She looked different. Smaller somehow, not physically, but in the way she carried herself. The spark that had once defined her, the fire, the ambition, was gone. As if she had finally come to terms with the weight of what she had lost. Our eyes met through the window. For a moment, she just looked at me, her expression unreadable. Then, she stood slowly, walking toward the door. I didn't move. When she reached me, she hesitated, her voice barely above a whisper. You did more for me than I ever deserved. I looked at her for a long time. Then I nodded. Yeah, I did. And without another word, I walked away, leaving her alone with nothing but her regrets.